I was already halfway down the driveway when the cab driver honked, not rudely, just a little reminder that the meter was running. I yanked open the back door, threw my laptop bag onto the seat, and told him the address of my office downtown. It was a Tuesday morning in mid-October, one of those golden, still mornings where the maple trees in our neighborhood looked almost too perfect, like someone had touched up the colors overnight. Amber and copper and that deep arterial red. I remember thinking, as we pulled away from the curb, that I needed to stop at the coffee cart before going up to the office because I'd skipped breakfast again. Then my hand went to my coat pocket, then to my bag, then back to my pocket. No keys. Not just my car keys, those were in my bag. My office keys. The entire ring with the building fob, the suite key, and the little flat key for the filing cabinet where I kept the original cost estimates for the Hartley project. I could picture them exactly, sitting on my nightstand next to my water glass, right where I'd set them when I came back from the bathroom at midnight to check my phone. I do this thing where I pull out everything from my pockets before bed and just leave it in a pile. Terrible habit. Truly terrible. "I'm sorry," I said to the driver. "I have to go back. I forgot something." He gave me a look in the rearview mirror, not annoyed, just the quiet exhaustion of a man who has driven people around long enough to find nothing surprising. "Back to Sycamore Drive?" "Yes, I'm so sorry." He made a U-turn without drama. The whole trip back was maybe 4 minutes. I was already mentally rescheduling my morning. I had a 9:15 call with the general contractor on the Hartley commercial build, and without those estimates in front of me, I'd be fumbling. I worked as a cost estimator for a mid-sized construction consulting firm. 6 years into the job, and I still kept paper backups of everything critical. Old habit from my first project manager, who told me that a server crash doesn't care about your deadline. He was right. I loved that job. I was good at it in a way that felt earned rather than natural. I'd put in the hours, learned to read blueprints the way other people read novels, and by the time I was 34, I was the person they called when a number didn't add up. My name is Serena, and what I heard that Tuesday morning changed the next several months of my life in ways I still find hard to explain without my voice going flat and careful, the way it does when I'm trying not to feel something while I'm describing it. Our house was a 4-bedroom colonial on Sycamore Drive in Millbrook Heights, one of those quiet suburbs where the lawns are well kept. The HOA sends passive-aggressive letters about recycling bin placement, and the biggest drama is usually which neighbor put up their Christmas lights before Thanksgiving. Marcus and I had bought it 4 years into our marriage, when the interest rates were still reasonable, and we both felt, for the first time, like actual adults with actual stakes in the world. We'd been married 6 years by that October, together for 8. Marcus worked in corporate logistics. He had a home office in the spare room down the hall, the room that used to be our someday guest room before it became his permanent workspace. He was a creature of routine, up at 7, coffee by 7:15, on his laptop by 8. He was still in his home office when I left that morning. I'd kissed him on the top of the head on my way out. He'd barely looked up from his screen. That was normal. That was just how things were between us by then. Not cold exactly, but worn smooth. Comfortable in the way that can mean either contentment or erosion, and you don't always know which until something cracks it open. We had a daughter, Lily. She was 7, and she kept a hamster named Pepper in a cage on her dresser. Pepper was a winter-white dwarf hamster, all gray and white and frantic, who ran on his wheel at 2 in the morning and somehow filled the whole upstairs with that plastic squeaking sound. Lily adored him. She'd carried him home from the pet store in a cardboard box pressed against her chest, and she talked to him like he understood every word. Watching her do that, just standing outside her door, watching her tell a hamster about her day at school, was the kind of thing that made everything else feel worth it. The cab pulled back up in front of the house. The driver put it in park. I told him I'd be 30 seconds just running in and out. The front door was unlocked. I always leave it unlocked when Marcus is home. He hates carrying a key. I pushed it open, stepped into the front hall. The house smelled like coffee and the faint ghost of the cinnamon candle I'd burned the night before. I could hear Marcus's voice from down the hall. His office door was half open, which wasn't unusual. He took a lot of calls for work. I was already moving toward the stairs when I caught a word. Just one word, sharp and out of place. Ready. Not meeting or figures or shipment, ready. The way he said it made me slow down without meaning to. I wasn't eavesdropping, I was just walking toward the staircase, and his voice was carrying the way voices do in a quiet house on a still morning. Then, "Get ready, she just left for work." I stopped. My hand was on the newel post at the bottom of the stairs. The wood was cool under my palm. I remember that detail with strange precision, the temperature of the wood, the faint sound of Pepper's wheel from upstairs, the smell of cinnamon still in the air. "You'll get the money after it's done," Marcus said. His voice was low and even, the way it gets when he's trying to sound calm and in control. I'd heard that voice in arguments. I'd heard it when he was closing a deal he was nervous about. "Remember, when she walks into her office," he paused, listening to whoever was on the other end. I did not move. I stood there with my hand on that post and my bag hanging off one shoulder and my office keys still upstairs on my nightstand, and I felt something strange settle over me. Not panic, not the hot, lurching shock I might have expected. Something quieter and colder, like a window opening in winter, that rush of air that tells you the temperature outside is not what you thought. He said a few more words, something about timing, something about making sure it looked right, and then the call ended. I heard the small, soft sound of his phone being set on his desk. I stood in that hallway for what felt like a full minute, but was probably 10 seconds. Then I walked quietly up the stairs, took the keys off the nightstand, walked back down, and let myself out the front door without making a sound. The cab driver looked up when I got back in. "Got them," I said. "Good." He pulled away from the curb. I stared out the window at the maple trees going past, all that amber and copper and red, and I didn't say another word for the rest of the ride. I just let myself think. Because here's what I knew in those first few seconds of calm, before the fear had a chance to move in. Marcus's younger brother, Derek, had been circling around our lives for the past 2 years in a way that made the hairs on my arms stand up. Not obviously, not in any way I could have easily explained to someone else without sounding paranoid. Just a creeping, low-level wrongness that I'd been filing away in the back of my mind. Derek was 31, unmarried, and the kind of person who always had a plan that he never fully explained. He'd done a short stint managing a storage facility, then some kind of contract work that Marcus described vaguely as consulting, and most recently, he'd been spending a lot of time at our house, showing up on weekends, joining us for dinner, asking me casually and often about my work schedule, about the projects I was on, about the Hartley build specifically once, in a way that made me change the subject without quite knowing why. And Marcus, my husband of 6 years, the man I'd built a life with on Sycamore Drive, who drank his coffee black and left cabinet doors open, and put Lily to bed every night with the same 3 chapters of the same book because she insisted on it. That man had just told someone to get ready, that she had just left for work, that the money would come after it was done. When she walks into her office, I pressed my lips together and looked at the passing trees. Get ready, I thought, because so would I. I just needed to understand exactly what I was getting ready for, and I had a feeling that by the time I reached that office building, I already knew where to start looking. The 9:15 call with the general contractor went fine. Better than fine, actually. I had the numbers memorized well enough that I didn't need the paper copies at all. I got through it on autopilot, saying the right things at the right moments, while the other half of my brain was doing something else entirely. I was making a list. Not on paper, not yet. Just in my head, running through every interaction with Derek over the past several months, arranging them in chronological order the way I'd arrange line items in a cost estimate, looking for the pattern underneath the surface noise. The first time he asked about the Hartley project was back in late July. We'd had a cookout in the backyard. Marcus, me, Lily, and Derek, just the 4 of us. Lily had run inside to check on Pepper, and Marcus had gone to get more ice. And Derek had leaned back in his lawn chair and said casually, like he was making conversation about the weather, "So that big commercial build you're working on, is that the one over on Hargrove Street?" I'd said yes. I'd told him it was a mixed-use development, retail on the ground floor, office space above. Nothing sensitive, just the kind of thing you'd find in any zoning announcement. "Big project," he'd said. "Lot of money involved." "For the client, yes," I'd said. He'd nodded, smiled, and then Lily had come back outside talking about Pepper's new tunnel toy, and the conversation had dissolved. But now I was counting. July, then late August at Lily's back-to-school dinner, when Derek had asked what phase the Hartley build was entering, and I'd said I couldn't really discuss it. He hadn't pushed. He never pushed. That was the thing about Derek. He gathered information the way some people collect loose change, casually over time, until the amount was suddenly significant. And now it was mid-October, and Marcus had said, when she walks into her office. I stared at the wall of my office for a long moment after the call ended. My office, the building fob, the suite key, the filing cabinet key, small and flat, that I carried on the same ring. Something cold moved through me. I picked up my phone and did something I hadn't done before. I Googled my own company name combined with the word litigation. Nothing came up. I Googled the Hartley project address, the usual zoning board minutes, the announcement of the commercial permit, a local business journal piece from 6 months ago. Nothing unusual. Then I sat back and thought about who I could call. The problem was that I didn't have many people I trusted without reservation. My best friend from college, Priya, lived in Portland now, and while I could call her for emotional support, she wasn't going to know anything useful about construction fraud or whatever this was. My mother was in Tucson and would immediately tell me to leave Marcus, which might end up being the right advice but wasn't what I needed at that moment. My colleagues were exactly that, colleagues, not confidants. But there was one person. Her name was Roberta Finch. She was 62 years old, recently retired, and she had spent 30 years as a forensic accountant specializing in commercial fraud. She was also my father's older sister, which made her my aunt, though we'd always had more of a mentor-student dynamic than a family one. She'd been the one who first suggested I go into cost estimation. She told me once, sitting at her kitchen table in New Jersey, that the best skill a woman in my field could develop was knowing how to read a number that didn't want to be found. I hadn't called her in about 4 months. We texted occasionally, birthday messages, a link she'd send when she saw something she thought I'd find interesting. But I hadn't called. I called her now. She picked up on the third ring. "Serena, this is unexpected." "I know," I said. "I need to talk to you about something. Not as family, as someone who understands fraud." There was a pause, not a long one. "All right," she said. "Tell me." I told her everything. I kept my voice even and quiet. I was in my office with the door closed, but the walls in this building were not built for privacy. I told her about the conversation I'd overheard, about Derek's pattern of questions, about the keys on my ring and what they unlocked. When I finished, Roberta was quiet for a moment. "The filing cabinet," she said. "What's in it?" "The original cost estimates for the Hartley project, the ones I submitted to the client before the GC was brought on, the baseline numbers. And if those numbers were altered, if someone substituted different figures, what would happen?" I felt the cold thing move through me again, but slower this time, more deliberate. If the original estimates disappeared and someone introduced inflated figures into the record, it could look like I had approved cost overruns that I hadn't approved. It could look like I had falsified the baseline to cover a markup. I stopped. It would look like fraud, on my part. Roberta said. It was the sound she made when something confirmed what she already suspected. And who benefits from that? Whoever is skimming from the project budget. If I'm the one who looks dirty, the real source of the discrepancy gets buried. I pressed my fingers against my forehead. Derek has been doing contract work. Marcus described it as consulting. I never pushed for details. "Of course you didn't," Roberta said, not unkindly. "You trusted your husband." That sentence sat in the air between us like something physical. I didn't respond to it. "Here's what you're going to do," Roberta said. "Right now, today, before you leave that office, you're going to make certified copies of every original document in that filing cabinet. Every page, every signature, every date stamp. You're going to keep one set on your person, and one set somewhere Marcus will never look. You're going to call your company's legal counsel, not tomorrow, today, and tell them you have reason to believe someone may attempt to tamper with project documentation. You don't have to name Marcus. You don't have to name Derek. You just flag the concern and create a paper trail that shows you raised it before anything happened." "And if I'm wrong," I said, "then you've wasted an afternoon and your files are very well organized." A pause. "But you're not wrong, Serena. You've never called me like this before. You're not the kind of person who panics." She was right. I wasn't. I'd stood at the bottom of my stairs and felt something cold and clear, not panic, and I was feeling it again now. "One more thing," Roberta said. "Don't tell Marcus you know. Not yet. Not until you understand the full shape of it. Right now you have a fragment. If he knows you heard him, that fragment is all you'll ever get." I said I understood. We agreed to talk again that evening. After I hung up, I sat in my chair for exactly 2 minutes. I know it was 2 minutes because I watched the clock on my computer. I let myself feel it, all of it, the specific quality of grief that comes not from loss, but from the moment just before loss, when you can still see the thing you're about to lose clearly and whole. 6 years, a colonial on Sycamore Drive, a man who put our daughter to bed every night with the same 3 chapters of the same book. 2 minutes. Then I opened my filing cabinet and I got to work. The copies took 40 minutes. I used the office scanner and saved everything to a thumb drive I kept in my bag, and I also printed a full physical set and sealed it in an inter-office envelope that I addressed to myself at my parents' house in Tucson. I'd mail it from the post office on my lunch break, certified mail, signature required, a timestamp that couldn't be altered. At 11:40, I walked down the hall to the office of our company's general counsel, a measured, unsentimental man named Paul Gresham, who had been with the firm for 12 years and who I had spoken to exactly twice before, both times about standard contract questions. I knocked on his open door. "Paul," I said, "do you have 10 minutes? I want to flag something about the Hartley documentation. Just a precaution." He looked up from his monitor. "Of course, sit down." I sat down, and I began, carefully and precisely, to build the first wall. By the time I walked out of his office at 12:15, Paul had logged a formal internal memo noting that I had raised concerns about the security of original project documents and had requested that the filing room be added to the building's access log system, meaning any entry would now require a keycard swipe and would generate a timestamp. He'd agreed to it without hesitation. He'd even seemed mildly concerned, in the quiet way that lawyers get when something might become a liability. I took the elevator down to the lobby, walked 2 blocks to the post office, and mailed the envelope to Tucson. Standing on the sidewalk outside the post office, watching the door close behind the envelope, I thought about Marcus. I thought about the way he'd said her in that sentence, "She just left for work," and how strange it was to hear yourself reduced to a pronoun in your own home. How strange, and how clarifying. My phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. "Thinking of making pasta tonight. Does Lily have gymnastics?" I stared at it for a moment. Then I typed back, "She does. 5:30. I'll pick her up on my way home. Pasta sounds great." I hit send and put my phone in my pocket. The afternoon sun was thin and October pale, and the maple trees along the street had dropped enough leaves that you could see the structure of the branches underneath, the actual skeleton of the thing, bare and exact and harder than it looked from a distance when everything was still in full color. That evening, I would call Roberta again. The following morning, I would do something else, something that Roberta had mentioned almost as an aside at the end of our call, in the quiet tone she used when she considered something important enough not to emphasize. Something about a specific type of attorney. Not a divorce attorney. Not yet. A fraud attorney. Because whatever Marcus and Derek had planned for the moment I walked into my office, I had already walked in. I had already seen it coming, and what they didn't know, what neither of them could possibly know yet, was that the woman they thought had just left for work had spent the entire day rearranging the ground beneath their feet. I started walking back toward the office building. My phone buzzed again. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. I answered. "Is this Serena Caldwell?" A woman's voice, careful, professional. "Yes," I said. "My name is Dana Voss. I'm calling from the Millbrook Heights field office of the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. I was hoping we could find a time to meet." A pause. "It's regarding the Hargrove Street development project." I stopped walking. A woman passing me on the sidewalk glanced at my face and looked away quickly. "Ms. Caldwell? Are you still there?" "Yes," I said. My voice was completely steady. "I'm still here. When would you like to meet?" We agreed to meet the following morning, Dana Voss and a colleague named Special Agent Terrence Howell, at a coffee shop 2 blocks from my office. Neutral ground, she'd said, somewhere that wouldn't raise questions if anyone happened to see me. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay next to Marcus in the dark and listened to him breathe, that slow, even rhythm I'd fallen asleep to for 6 years. And I thought about how a person can be so close to someone and still be completely alone inside their own knowledge. He'd made pasta, just like he said he would. He'd poured me a glass of red wine. He'd helped Lily with her reading homework at the kitchen table while I cleaned up, and at one point he'd looked over at me and smiled, and I'd smiled back, just like always, just like nothing. The coffee shop was called Hendricks and Company, one of those places with exposed brick and pour-over options and a chalkboard menu that changed weekly. I got there first, ordered a black coffee, and sat at a corner table with my back to the wall. Dana Voss arrived at 8:02, a woman in her early 40s, compact and precise in a dark blazer, with the kind of watchful stillness that reminded me of Roberta. Terrence Howell was taller, quieter, and carried a manila folder that he set on the table without opening. "Thank you for meeting us," Dana said. She didn't waste time. "Ms. Caldwell, your name came up in the context of an ongoing investigation into financial irregularities connected to the Hargrove Street development. I want to be clear from the start. You are not a target. We believe you may be a victim." I wrapped both hands around my coffee cup. "Tell me what you know," I said. What they knew was considerably more than I had pieced together. The FBI had been tracking a scheme for approximately 7 months, since early spring, as it turned out, which meant it had started well before Derek began asking me questions at backyard cookouts. A subcontractor connected to the Hartley project had been flagging inflated materials invoices to an outside accounts payable processor. The processor, a shell company registered in Delaware under a name that meant nothing to anyone, was controlled by Derek. Marcus, according to their financial forensics, had been wiring money from a joint investment account I didn't know existed into that same shell company in amounts small enough to avoid automatic reporting triggers. Amounts between $8,000 and $9,000 transferred at irregular intervals over 6 months. In total, just over $62,000. $62,000. I turned that number over in my mind and felt something that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite grief, something more like the strange, flat clarity you get when a doctor gives you a diagnosis you already suspected. So that's what it was. That's what it actually was. The plan, Dana continued, appears to have had a second phase. Based on communications we've recovered, someone was going to access your office filing cabinet and substitute altered baseline estimates for the originals. The altered figures would have shown inflated approved costs, making it appear that you had signed off on the markup. It would have taken the scrutiny off the subcontractor invoices and redirected it toward you. "When she walks into her office," I said quietly. Dana looked at me. "I'm sorry?" "Something I heard," I said. "Something my husband said on the phone, yesterday morning." She and Howell exchanged a look. Howell opened the manila folder and slid a legal pad across the table. "We'd like you to write down exactly what you heard, word for word, as precisely as you can remember." I wrote it down. I also told them about the call to Paul Gresham, the access log request, the certified copies I'd mailed to Tucson. Howell's expression didn't change much, but he wrote something on his own notepad and underlined it twice. "You did all of that yesterday," Dana said. It wasn't quite a question. "Yes." "Before we called you?" "Yes." She looked at me for a moment. "Ms. Caldwell, I have to ask, did you have prior knowledge of the investigation?" "No," I said. "I had prior knowledge of my husband." That sentence landed quietly between the three of us. Dana nodded once, slowly, and moved on. They walked me through what they needed: my cooperation in documenting the original filing cabinet contents, a formal statement, and this was the part that required me to hold very still inside, my agreement not to confront Marcus or Derek until the Bureau was ready to move. They were close, days, not weeks. They needed the second phase to be attempted, or at least clearly intended, so that the conspiracy charge would hold. "We need them to try," Howell said, "and based on what you overheard, they intend to move soon." "So I go to work," I said, "like nothing happened." Exactly like nothing happened. I thought about pasta. I thought about a glass of red wine and a smile across the kitchen. "I can do that," I said. And I did. For 3 more days, I did it with a steadiness that I think surprised even me. I went to work. I came home. I helped Lily with her spelling words. She was working on a list that included organize and enough and separate, all those words that look wrong no matter how many times you see them written out. I sat across from Marcus at dinner and asked him about his day and listened to him talk, and I watched his face for any flicker of guilt or urgency, and found, to my cold amazement, almost none. Either he was very good at this, or he had found a way to believe that what he was doing wasn't that serious. I didn't know which was worse. Roberta called each evening. She didn't ask me how I was feeling. She asked me what I'd observed, what I'd noted, whether anything had changed. It was exactly the kind of conversation I needed: factual, purposeful, forward-facing. Once, near the end of a call, she said, "You're doing something very hard, Serena. Most people can't hold it together like this." I said I didn't feel like I was holding it together so much as I was running on a very specific kind of fuel. She said that was the same thing. On Thursday afternoon, 2 days before the Bureau moved, Derek came by the house. I was in the kitchen when I heard his car pull up. I knew the sound of it, a gray Accord with a cracked mud flap on the rear left. From all those weekends he'd been showing up uninvited. I heard Marcus go to the front door. I heard them talking in the hallway, voices low, and I stood very still at the kitchen counter and listened to the tone of it, even though I couldn't make out words. There was something different in the register, tighter, more focused. They were coordinating something. I didn't need to hear the specific words to know it. Derek came into the kitchen to say hello. He did this every time, the casual pop-in, the easy smile, the way he'd lean against the counter like he lived there. "Hey, Serena, long week?" "Always," I said. I poured him a glass of water without being asked, because that was the kind of thing I always did, and I needed to be exactly the person he expected me to be. "You staying for dinner?" "Nah, just passing through. Wanted to catch Marcus about something." He picked up the glass and drank half of it. Looked around the kitchen with the mild, proprietary gaze of someone assessing a space they expect to understand better than they do. "You look tired." "I am," I said honestly, "but I'll be fine." He left 20 minutes later. Marcus came back into the kitchen and said Derek had stopped by to return a tool he'd borrowed. I said that was nice of him. Marcus kissed me on the side of the head and went back to his office. I exhaled very slowly and went upstairs to check on Lily. She was sitting on her bed reading, with Pepper running circuits in his cage on the dresser. The wheel made its small plastic sound, and Lily looked up when I came in and said, "Mom, did you know that hamsters can run like 6 miles in one night?" "I did not know that," I said. "That's so much," she said, with the specific wonderment of a 7-year-old encountering the scale of the world. "It really is," I said. I sat on the edge of her bed and looked at Pepper going around and around on his wheel, working so hard, covering so much distance without going anywhere, and I thought, not me, not anymore. They arrested Marcus on a Saturday morning. Lily was at her friend Cora's house for a birthday party. I had arranged that deliberately, told Cora's mother on Wednesday that I might need Lily to stay a little longer than planned, and she'd said, "Of course, no problem, the girls could have a sleepover." I hadn't explained why. I just needed Lily not to be home. I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee when the cars pulled up. 2 unmarked sedans and a Millbrook Heights Police Department cruiser, because the local department had been looped in for the physical arrest. Dana Voss was there. So was Howell. Marcus came out of his home office when he heard the knock, and I watched from the kitchen doorway as he opened the front door and saw what was waiting for him. His face did something I hadn't expected. It didn't go blank or hard or defiant. It just fell, like a structure losing its supports from the bottom. He looked across the room at me, and in that look was the question he couldn't ask out loud. "Did you know?" I held his gaze and said nothing. They took him out to one of the sedans. Derek was arrested at his apartment in Glenview at roughly the same time, I learned later. The subcontractor, a man named Russell Coates, who ran a small materials supply operation out of a warehouse near the highway, was picked up the following Monday after his attorney spent the weekend trying to negotiate a cooperation agreement. He cooperated fully. As it turned out, Russell had records of every communication, every invoice, every wire. He'd kept them because he'd been nervous about Derek from the beginning and wanted insurance. That insurance, in the end, helped the Bureau close the case in a way that left very little room for anyone to argue. The charges against Marcus included wire fraud and conspiracy. Against Derek, wire fraud, conspiracy, and money laundering related to the shell company. Their attorney, a man I never met and never wanted to, apparently advised both of them that a trial would not go well. Marcus pleaded guilty 8 weeks later. Derek followed 2 weeks after that. Paul Gresham called me the morning after Marcus's arrest to say that the firm was standing firmly behind me, that my documentation had been exactly what cleared my name in the Bureau's assessment, and that my position was secure. He said it in the measured, unsentimental way he said everything, and I appreciated it more than I could express. I thanked him and hung up and sat in the quiet of my house for a long time. The divorce took 7 months. It wasn't contested. Marcus's attorney advised him not to fight it, and honestly, I think some part of Marcus was past fighting anything by then. I kept the house. It made financial sense, and Lily needed her school and her street and her room. I bought out Marcus's equity share, which was possible because Roberta helped me identify a home equity line I could qualify for on my salary alone, and because my credit was, and had always been, immaculate. Marcus moved into a rental apartment in a town 40 minutes away. He paid child support. He called Lily on Sundays. He was not a bad father, even at the end. That was the part that took me the longest to know what to do with. I repainted the spare room that used to be his office. I didn't make it a guest room. I made it a reading room, a chair, a lamp, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, and a small desk in the corner where Lily could do homework. She picked out the color herself, a dusty sage green that looked, she said, like a forest but inside. 8 months after that Tuesday in October, I sat in that room on a Friday evening after Lily had gone to bed. I had a book in my lap and a glass of wine on the side table, and I could hear Pepper's wheel going from down the hall, that small, frantic spinning, and the house was quiet around me in the way that a house can be quiet when it's genuinely at peace rather than just holding its breath. I thought about the morning it started, the cab pulling away from the curb, my hand going to my pocket, then my bag, then my pocket again. The U-turn, the front door, the newel post, cool under my palm, that one word cutting through a still October morning, ready. I had been so ready. I just hadn't known it yet. That's the thing no one tells you about being betrayed by someone you trusted completely. It doesn't make you smaller. Not if you let yourself stay clear.